The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
George.
Yep, that, but Snake, and more times than I would like to admit to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, dude. I've been thinking about doing that all day, because we record in the evenings. We both have families, little kiddos, and I was like, am I gonna risk waking my kids up for this joke? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I am going to.
Yeah, because so many kids these days are raised to believe that they're the most important thing in the world, and they are very important. But but at some point it's like like your child comes down like holding their plushie, and they're like, "Dad, what happened? Is everything okay?" And it's like, "Yeah, I had to do this bit." It's like, but it woke me up, and
I had to do this bit.
It's commitment to the bit. Like if there's any time to learn it, now's the time.
Yeah, seriously, you got to get that into those kids early. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
We played a video game. We played Metal Gear Solid.
Yes. So so for quite some time, we kept talking about playing Metal Gear, and you kept talking about what a solid game it was. So then we played it, and I didn't think it was a very solid game. But now I found out that you were actually saying that the game's name was Metal Gear Solid, which really I feel that you did an expressly poor job communicating.
I accept 100% of the responsibility for this with absolutely no ability to defend myself, because obviously this is totally at my feet.
I thank God, because I wasn't going to rest until you accepted 100% responsibility. Like, I am willing to accept 0% of this miscommunication, like 0.00 with a 0% margin of error.
Okay, so you'll appreciate this. If any of our listeners appreciate this story besides you, please at me on Twitter. But we have a lot of regular analog clocks in my house because I just like the way they look. And so my 5-year-old was like, what time is it? Because she's now suddenly very aware of time, because school starts at a certain time and ends at a certain time, and lunch is at a certain time. So she's now very aware that what time it is matters for certain things. And so she asked me the other night what time it was, and I was getting over a cold, so I didn't feel very well. So I kind of looked over at the clock and I said, which number is the small hand pointing to? And she said, it's between the 6 and the 7. And I said, then it is between 6 and 7. And she said, yeah, but what time is it? And I said, no, that was enough significant digits.
Yes, that was all of the sig figs you needed.
And she just kind of like you would expect from most people, honestly, not even just 5-year-olds, kind of stared at me for a second and then just went back to talking as if I hadn't just steamrolled right over her with jargon she didn't understand. I was just like, this is fine. She stopped asking me about the time, and that's really what I wanted.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite things to do occasionally, because I'm a jerk. Occasionally at work is when somebody says, hey, do you know where so-and-so is? I'm like, no idea. And they're like, well, and then when they ask follow-up questions to that, I'm just like, you pumping a dry well, right? But then, sometimes if I'm particularly frustrated, they'll be like, well, do you have any idea where they are? I'll be like, do you want me to go for accuracy or precision? And they're like, accuracy? I'm like, they're somewhere in the known universe, And they're like, well, that's not helpful. And I'm like, I know, but it's super accurate because I can guarantee you I'm right. It's just really imprecise. And then they're like, well, can you do any better? I'm like, they're probably in the state of Georgia.
Nice.
I saw them a couple of hours ago, so it's unlikely that they have managed to escape the state in that period of time. But the more accurate you're going to make me be, the less precise I'm going to be. And they're like, well, can you be more precise? I'm like, I can be infinitely precise. They are standing right in front of you. Probably not accurate, but they're in that exact millimeter by millimeter section of space. I'm not accurate, but man, that was a precise measurement, wasn't it?
Well, and I like the idea of going from known universe to the state of Georgia, because you could make a strong case that between your first measurement and your second measurement, you had what, millions of orders of magnitude increase in precision. Like, I would say, like, whoa, compared to what I said a second ago, that answer was hyper precise.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I just like blew you out of the water with my like quintillions of increased precision over several seconds. I mean, come on, man. But anyway, we played Metal Gear Solid.
We did play Metal Gear Solid. So, North American release, 1998. I didn't dig in on this because I try not to dig in on things if I can avoid it, but
in general, in life.
Yeah, just period. That's why the podcast is such a good fit, because I'd never follow up on anything.
Nope.
But I got the impression that this game had a worldwide simultaneous release, which I know isn't true, but for some reason, the only, like, every time I would look at like a common source for the release date, it would just pop up the North American one. And after I only looked at like 2 or 3 places, and I was like, oh, they're probably just optimizing for a US audience because they know, like, I'm accessing a page in English and they know I'm in North America. Right. I was like, I could follow up on this because I know it came out in Japan first, but I'm just not gonna.
So what they did clearly was they had several Metal Gears outfitted to launch the game, and they just deployed them all over the world to launch a sudden massive deployment strike, right? So it was all actually released at the same time.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
So
and I have no counter evidence. So
yeah, I mean, I'm possibly super precise. I don't really know.
Prove us wrong. At us. You know?
So I want to kind of combine a brief description of this game with my nostalgia goggles for this game, because this is a game that I played with my buddy, who I've mentioned quite a few times, and I borrowed this from him a lot. I actually own 2 different copies of this game, and will probably one day own more copies of this game because they keep releasing it as like part of a set. So like I have one of the re-releases and then one of the other re-releases, but I can't play either of those on any of the game consoles I currently have. So if they released this again and they were like, oh, now you can play it on the PS4, right? Like, and I know I could do the digital one, shut up. But like, I like the box art because I don't know the artist's name, but his artwork is really, really, really gorgeous. And I say all that to say this: when this game first came out, I remember sitting down to play it at Brian's house and just being like, this is like playing a movie, and not thinking that was a bad thing, which I didn't know at the time, but that put me into a certain broad category of gamer, because there are lots of gamers, a lot of critics and people whose opinions I really respect, who hate when they can describe a video game that way, because they're like, why wouldn't I just watch a movie? And I'm like, no, it's like playing a movie, right? and I understand now as an adult why everyone doesn't love that, but even as a kid, I was like, the camera's different, and the way they do the music is different, and the way the story is delivered is different. Like, it really does feel like a 15-hour movie, and for a lot of people who've never played this game, I probably just turned them right the hell off.
I mean, but to be fair, I think that is an apt description, and I think that if you did just turn people off, they were gonna be turned off. Like they if they had a friend that was like, oh man, you really, really should play Metal Gear Solid, you'll love it, it's great, it's an amazing game, and then they're like, okay, and then they Googled like Metal Gear Solid, and then they like this podcast comes up and they start listening to it, just to like on their way into the work, because they're like, I'll just like do a little research beforehand, and then it's like playing a movie, and they were like, hell no. Then we just saved them 15 hours, because they were gonna
frustrating, boring hours.
Yes. So I don't like, a lot of times when people are like, oh no, I must have just made this person unsubscribe, that's typically like a bad thing. But in this case, it's just like, oh man, I might have just convinced somebody to not play this game. It's like, then if that was the reason, then you have saved them time, not turned them off to something they would have otherwise been turned on to. I actually have nostalgia, a nostalgia experience for this game as well. I had never played it up until now, but that being said, I had this one friend of mine in college who would never shut the hell up about it,
He
and
sounds handsome.
he does sound that way. But all that being said, no, I mean, like you've talked about this game for some time, and even though I wasn't able to quite get through and beat it because of a number of reasons that we'll get into, not for lack of trying, but there are some very iconic moments in this game that you've kind of like spoken on a number of times that I have finally now gotten to experience and gotten to see. If it was nice for me because the way you described them, I thought that, right as I watched them, that my TV would turn to gold and start spewing Bitcoin at me, and I could just turn all of that in and then be a bajillionaire, But none of that happened. But that being said, it was interesting to finally actually see some of these things that you had spoken about for so long and see them firsthand and see if they held up.
Well, and this is something that I'm aware that, like most geeks and nerds and dorks and weirdos, when I'm passionate about some dumb thing like a TV show or a video game or some cartoon or whatever, like I will defend it way more than is necessary for someone who isn't paid to defend that thing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like you just think of the stereotypes, right? Like the Picard versus Kirk arguments, or the Star Trek versus Star Wars.
What argument?
I mean, obviously.
Right.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah. There's a reason you have a Picard sweater and not a Kirk sweater. I mean, come on. Anyway,
yeah, come on, guys.
But those kinds of Hercules versus Xena, whatever. And people do this with
He-Man versus She-Ra.
Yeah, people do this with athletic teams, and somehow that's not nerdy, right? But like, I realize now that if you actually want someone to enjoy the thing that you love, this is not the way to do it, right? Because shaking them by the collar and screaming it's the best thing ever, if you convince them and then they go and watch the movie, play the game, read the book, whatever, and they don't have an experience exactly as you described, you've ruined it, right? And they may have had an amazing experience, but if you built it up too much, right? And this is like, when I think back to the transition from high school to college, and I met people who had not had my exact life experience because they grew up in a different town and they had different hobbies and things. And all of the time I spent shaking them by the collar and being like, no, you must love this thing. It's like, oh God, so much wasted time and effort when I could have just been off loving the thing.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and especially when, like generally the way I try to sidestep that now is, I'm like, oh my God, have you played, The Last of Us? No, actually, okay, it is a very, very solid game. I would strongly suggest you check it out. It does a lot of very neat and innovative and creative things. That being said, I am a huge fan of it, so I'm just going to gush about it for a second. And here we go. So, you appropriately qualify the upcoming monologue to be like, look, it doesn't turn your TV to gold and start spewing Bitcoin, but I think it does.
Yeah, but to me, yeah. The one other thing I want to mention about this game is, and we talked a little bit about this when we played Metal Gear. It's okay. So I don't know if this is obvious, but every time I start to say Metal Gear, my mouth just starts to form the word solid, and I have to choke that down to just say Metal Gear.
I can tell because you sound like a British person doing an American accent.
I'm sure I sound insane, which is what I think.
You're like
you
Metal
mean
Gear, sir.
And if I was talking about the robot, right, just saying Metal Gear, right? But when you say the title of the game, it's like, you don't say, oh, back during Civil War. You say the Civil War, right? It's like like a Tribe Called Quest. Like it's a full, the word, to me, having started with Metal Gear Solid, the word solid is just on the end of that title. Anyway, when we played Metal Gear, I mentioned that Hideo Kojima has he is like a divisive figure in some circles for a lot of his writing and stuff we're about to talk about, but he's really obsessed with movies, and he's really obsessed with Western movies in particular. And so this game, even more than the early ones, because it's so much more cinematic and there's spoken dialogue and there's actually literally live footage in some parts of the game, did Japanese and European audiences and like Asia Pacific, right? So Australian audiences, like, did they have any idea what the hell this stuff was? I mean, because like I knew because I'm an American and I grew up at the right time in history to have this background knowledge, but there's a lot of references to like the Cold War and like Western movies and just like Western cultural stuff, but it's all wrapped up and delivered in this like not just a weird Japanese kind of humor that's a little foreign to Western audiences, but his humor, which is like even quirky by Japanese standards, which is also kind of different than most Western humor, particularly in the 90s when this game came out. So like, I just wonder, like, the audience for this game, like the people who have the correct overlap of background pop culture knowledge is Hideo Kojima. Like no one else on earth until this game had become famous and people had started to look into this kind of crap, like had all of the background knowledge, because what are the odds that someone has his exact sense of humor, knows all the stuff about Japanese culture that he knows, being a native Japanese person born and raised there, and knows all the stuff about Western culture that he knows, being a person who's obsessed with Western culture in a part of the world that's obsessed with Western culture. Like that Venn diagram does not have a lot of overlap.
No, but I don't think that you need to be, when you're looking at marketing to an audience, I don't think that you need to be looking at the center of the Venn diagram. You need to be looking at the total area coverage of the Venn diagram, right? So,
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So basically it's like, there's a whole bunch of like humor and Japanese references and things that we wouldn't get in that, but we didn't need to because we understood all of the Cold War stuff and all of this other kind of items. There's, like did the entire Japanese audience understand like all the Cold War references and all this sort of stuff? Probably not. But I mean, there's probably a ton of references in some old kung fu videos that we've watched that just went right over our heads, but we weren't in it for that. We were in it. We were in it for the other thing, So I think that what you just described may actually be one of the reasons why it was so successful, was because there was stuff in there that so many different audiences could kind of like latch onto.
Well, and that adds to that social element, right? Of like, hey, I noticed there's this, like this character says this thing in this weird way, or there's this footage I don't understand, or there's this thing that seems like a joke, but it didn't really seem all that funny to me, right? So then you kind of get that like, what did you think about this? Hey, what about that one scene with that one thing, right? And it kind of encourages that sort of thing a little bit. Like if there's a lot of thoughtful stuff in there that's not likely to have a ton of audience overlap, then maybe it helps to engender that sort of like, oh, in the, halfway through the second disc when this crazy thing happens, like, did that make any sense to you? Like the characters seem to know what was going on.
Right. So yes, with all that said, visuals.
Yeah. So, I was talking on the internet with a listener who had never played this game, and I was like, we're kind of open the kimono a little, and I was like, oh, we're going to play Metal Gear Solid. Hey, maybe you should play it and let me know what you think of it. And they got about 30 seconds in, and they were like, why do all the characters' faces look like dolls with the eyes scratched out by a child? And to say that was a glass shattering moment doesn't really accurately describe it, because it's more like I had already run off the cliff Wile E. Coyote style, but I was refusing to look down. And as soon as someone just gently pushed my head down, and so I had to look and see that there was no more ground under me, I just went crashing to the stone below, because now that is all I can see, right? I'd already made my peace with the fact that their mouths don't move and they just kind of bobblehead to like simulate, jaw movement. But the eyes being described as dolls' scratched out eyes by like a psycho child, I was just like, no, because that's exactly what they look like.
Oh God. You see, that's one of the things that okay, so I thought that the art style was very well done, given the constraints of the media and, the constraints of the hardware, and the fact that, they couldn't do a Super Mario 64 or Star Fox 64 where they just like made them like wild and zany characters. So like their eyes are like enormous, like they have to look.
Yeah, they couldn't be
like
white circles with black dots in the middle.
Exactly. Sorry, I just pictured that. I got it.
Just all googly eye snake.
The internet has to have made that at some point. But no, so I thought that, like the choices that they made to, kind of like paint on the faces and paint on, like Snake's rippling abs. I mean, there's a reason why that man's called Solid Snake. Am I right? I mean, like that, he is shredded. I mean, from one beef tower to another, respect. But but all that being said, I thought that they made the right choices where they had to for, like, well, which would look better, having them actually move their mouths and having it look like some crazy Lovecraftian-ish like problem, or just going with simplified. And it would not surprise me with the amount of attention, because I mean, again, Hideo Kojima wanted to make movies, the amount of attention that they kind of put into this stuff, that like they did try a number of different kind of eyes. And this was the best that they were like, this is what looks the most consistent,
Well, and I think it's there are a ton of women in this universe, and it feels like they optimized that face for the furrowed brow man who does things, right? Because it looks less absurd on Snake, on Otacon. Well, Otacon wears glasses, I guess. But it looks less absurd on like Snake and Vulcan Raven, who's like a big hulking behemoth, like on Liquid Snake, who's got, kind of like, he's always sort of like intense about whatever's going on, right? That they all seem like their brow is furrowed and it would kind of be casting a little bit of shadow, like kind of anime style. But Meryl, who is supposed to be like a doe-eyed, like total deer in the headlights kind of, his in all of Snake's interactions with her, like, you're too green, right? And it's just, so for her to have this like super pale skin and then these giant black orbs in the middle of her face where she doesn't obviously have a prominent brow, it's like, whoa. And then on top of it, Snake is like, no, you have kind, compassionate eyes. It's like, no, she doesn't. Her eyes are terrifying, like everyone's.
And that's why he found them compassionate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you know what it is? It's like in that Twilight Zone episode, spoilers for a 70-year-old episode of the Twilight Zone, but it's like that Twilight Zone episode with the pig snouts. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. There. And Hideo Kojima being a huge fan of American, yeah, we got there. But so one of the things that, and this does kind of tie to visuals, which is that the intro is basically the intro to a movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, it's now one of the things that they did do was all of like the art, and I may be wrong on this, but from what I remember is that all of the cutscenes, I don't remember seeing any of them that were like it was like a pre-rendered cutscene where, in the sense that,
Hideo Kojima famously never ever pre-renders anything. So however good he wants his cutscenes to look, the whole game's got to look that good because they're all done in engine is the term for that.
Which I really like, because I think that helps with immersion, because the idea is it's not like, okay, I am now playing the video game part as a video game player, and now I'm watching the movie part. It's like, it's all, fluid and uninterrupted. I felt that the art and the visuals and clearly like the camera angles and everything was very well thought out and well chosen at the beginning of the game, which I appreciated, because I kind of knew what I was getting into, because I know all of like, or not all of, but some of the lore around this series. But if you got mildly irritated with the first 10 minutes of just cutscene, like that, then, I mean, the game lets you know what it's about, right? So, like if you didn't like that, and then another 3 minutes into it, you've got another cutscene, and another 4 minutes into it, you've got another cutscene. You would probably, if you didn't like that, then you're out, and you didn't like play for 10 hours, and then all of a sudden the game comes to a grinding halt when the style of the game changes, and you're forced to watch 3 hours of a movie. It's like the game lets you know what it's about right off of the top, so you're either on board with it or you're not. I like that.
Yeah. No, and I didn't want to talk over you, but as someone who played Final Fantasy VII, I am totally on board the do your cutscenes in engine train, because in Final Fantasy VII, to go from terrifying hoof hands Cloud to, pretty good, really good for the time, but like pretty good looking Cloud, like in the cutscenes, like that is jarring, because it's like, oh, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII. Oh, now I'm watching a scene from Final Fantasy VII, the movie. Okay, now I'm playing Final Fantasy VII again, right? And because the cutscenes, the fully rendered cutscenes in Final Fantasy traditionally, but Final Fantasy VII specifically, are really not that long, right? They're fairly short, minutes. But I mean, the cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid are like, they're long, dude. Like, they're really long.
Yeah.
So like, if you kept getting that jarring, like, now I'm playing the game, now I'm not playing the game, now I'm playing the game, now I'm not playing the game, that would be immersion breaking in a way that I think sucks. But also, because the fourth wall breaking stuff we're going to get to later, like, gets ramped up even more over time. And in the cutscenes, because they're happening in the normal game engine, sometimes you can like go into first person and look around. Sometimes you can like interact with the world in some way during a cutscene, right? And it reminds you that, like, yes, you're watching the story, but you are still playing a video game. So like, you still have some semblance of control and autonomy. And it's just that weird kind of stuff he likes to do with, breaking the fourth wall. But that wouldn't work in the slightest if it was a fully rendered cutscene. Like, that wouldn't even be an option, let alone make any damn sense.
It wouldn't be in the same ballpark. It wouldn't be in the same league. It wouldn't even be in the same sport. One thing that I thought the visuals did very, very well, and then they for me personally ruined it, was so like your HUD is very elegant. I feel most specifically the map, right? The mini map
the
with
Soliton radar.
Sorry, it took all of my energy. I blacked out there for a minute and almost shut my computer. So I'm back now. What are we? Oh God, we're doing like a podcast or something. No, but yeah. So the Holoton radar. Yeah. But yeah, so I thought that, like it gives you obviously a really clean kind of top-down view of the world. It visually empowers you to be stealthy, right? Because it kind of outlines, the areas that, are like solid objects, right? So you can very quickly see like, oh, that's a tank and that's something else. And it has the visual cones of like, if you are here, then you're going to get seen. And if you're not, then you're not. And I thought that was beautifully and elegantly done until they sat me down like a 3-year-old and explained it to me in the opening. That frustrated me because I was like, you made this amazing thing. I can automatically tell all of the stuff that's going on. You're feeding it into my brain in this beautiful fashion. You're like, hey, okay, so this is how this works. It's like, no, I got it, man. Push the gas pedal to go, push the brake to stop. Yeah. But so you're going to push down on the gas pedal, right? Yeah, no, I got it. I'm going to start going, and you're going to start going. Yeah, I got it. Now, the longer you push it, the longer I'm getting, the faster I'm going to go. I get it. And it's like, no. We're going to explain it to you. And I didn't want to like hard skip through it because I was afraid that they were going to sprinkle in some other stuff that like, which they totally would do, that I was going to really need. So I'm like, yep. Yeah. Oh no, this was just explaining to me how to interact with this very beautifully well-crafted HUD. So I thought that was like a plus point and a negative point, like a plus point for visuals, a negative point for like game design, where it's like, no, I got it. Well, and you did good. You made the sale.
If you think of the time in history, right? Like, maybe this is the first game that ever did something like that, right? Or it was certainly, this was not a well-established standard at that time for sure. That being said, when I got up to the top of the elevator and it's like, you take off the mask and it's like, you are the Solid Snake. Go, save the DARPA chief, shoot that guy in the face. No, wait, not that guy. Shoot that guy. Okay, good. Right. And you're like, yeah, I'm Snake. I'm going to go do stuff. And then Mei Ling gets on the codec and she's like, let me explain to you how your radar system works. And you totally lose control of the character, but Snake is doing stuff so that you can see him like go into first person view and you can see him move so that the Soliton radar updates as he's moving. And I was just like, right? Because it's essentially like if at the beginning of every book you read, they were like, okay, so you're going to read this book from left to right and top to bottom when you get to the end of a page, you're going to turn the page and it's like, yes, I've read other books. I know how books work, but I'm like, I respect that at this time in history, this may be the first book. So maybe people really weren't used to books, but I will 100% agree with you that in a land of my, elevated games literacy, this did not survive nostalgia goggles. That entire conversation with Mei Ling, I was just like, shut up. But
I got it.
I didn't skip through it because I was afraid there would be story stuff in there that I didn't remember.
Yeah, and so here's the reason why it very well may have been like the pioneering thing, but to me, a good visual is a good visual. Like there's a reason why like it's perma around now. Like you can hand off a video game with that type of HUD to someone who has never played any game with that type of HUD before, and they'll immediately pick it up, right? So or generally, but yeah, so that's why I was just kind of like it was, like they made this amazing thing, but they were like, but what if it's still too obtuse? What it to me, it smacked of they did not have faith in their audience.
Yeah, I agree.
Like to where they're like, we have to like make sure that you've got this, right? It's like, yeah, I got it. Just trust me a little bit. You're clearly going to trust me enough with this bananas insane plot that I'm going to apparently have to follow. So you believed in Santa for 10 years. Can you believe in yourself for 10 freaking minutes?
So I feel like I want to give you a throwaway comment, and then I want to get on to the meat of what I cared about with the visuals. My throwaway comment is I literally have in my notes, oh, hey, George, PS1 textures that are muddy, but it makes sense. Are you happy now? Because, as an N64 guy, you had lots of bright and colorful games with simple, solid colors. And as a PS1 guy, I played a lot of games that look like being stabbed in the eyes and, in hindsight. And, this game, like, it makes sense. Like, there's a lot of, dirt and snow and grain and metal and stone, and like, it just makes sense that you see like all these grainy textures everywhere. And where things should be completely solid colors, they are. They don't totally shy away from it, but it's just, I was like, okay, finally, a game where the grainy PS1 textures are like on brand. Yay. But the thing that I want to dive into is cinema camera. Because cinema camera is particularly interesting to me because this is kind of an artifact of the PS1, PS2 era that has not really survived into modern history. And the Nintendo 64 didn't really do this in my experience, right? There's a camera, but it's usually free roaming or completely fixed, right? Where you have no control over it, but it's fixed in a way that's like, you're watching a play, you're looking at it from the side or whatever. The camera in Metal Gear Solid is cinematic in the way the camera in Resident Evil is cinematic, where every space has a fixed camera view. And if you don't like it, you can go screw yourself. And that's just like, those are very intentional design decisions that were made. In Resident Evil, it was usually to build tension. In Metal Gear Solid, it's sometimes to build tension. It's sometimes because I think that's what he thought that shot would look like if that scene was playing out in a movie, which is not always the way that you would want to interact with the world when you're controlling the character. But then there are certain times where I think a really terrible straight top-down camera with no peripheral vision, so you cannot see what the hell you're doing at all, is used to force you to go slowly and to rely on the first person view, because you can't move when you're in first person view in this game like you can in the later ones. So if you know there's bad guys over there somewhere, but you're not exactly sure because you're not quite close enough that they're showing up on the Soliton radar, then you can hit the first person and you can look around and kind of see what's going on, right? And that top-down camera is used pretty aggressively. There's a lot of cinematic shots, but that totally freaking useless top-down camera with no peripheral vision, because it's a 4:3 camera, right? It's not 16:9. It is used so much that I think that was their way of forcing you to proceed slowly, proceed stealthily, and rely on the first-person camera. Like, how did you, someone who I'm pretty confident has not played a ton of games that use this sort of camera, how did you feel about this camera?
It forced me a little bit more to rely on the radar, on the Soliton radar,
Yeah.
which which I think was also fine. I did not use the first person view very regularly, and it definitely came back to bite me a number of times when I spent way long, because I would honestly, I forget that it was a thing, you know? So there were a number of areas where I was like, where do I go? What do I do? And then, you know, honestly, the first few times I just looked up a walkthrough and I was like, well, how the hell was I supposed to know that? The most stark one was right after you fight Vulcan Raven. Is that right?
Yes.
Did I do that right?
Yes.
Yeah, the guy in the tank.
Yeah.
You know,
Quick Man and Light Man and Vulcan Raven and,
Vulcan
and Armored
Raven.
Armadillo.
Vulcan, that's so Raven. Yeah, so right after you fight him, you go into an area where there's a giant sliding top up and down door that is cracked a little, and you can crawl underneath it. And you'd never know from the top down view. You have to go in the first person view, and then you can see that it's cracked open, you know?
Or the other way is to have played the game several dozen times and just already know that that's there. You could have done that, is what I'm saying.
That is true. If I had a time machine, like, how would that work? Because there would always be the first time I had to do it.
Nope.
But
time is a flat circle.
it's what is it called? It's a Jeremy Bearimy kind of a thing, you know?
That's right.
Yeah. But all that being said, yes. So yeah, I definitely did not use the first person view as much as I should have, but I did rely a lot on the Soliton radar, which to me also had a similar effect where, like, I was forced to go slowly and, you know, stealthily. And I mean, and also I think that it's further reinforced with the fact that you can't, if you run and gun, and we can get into this mechanics, if you run and gun in this game, though, you are not long for this world.
Nope. Just like the original Metal Gear, they really dissuade you from combat in a variety of ways.
Right. Which, and just because I'm afraid I'll forget about it later, frustrated me in some of the boss battles, because they, in those cases, specifically can dissuade you from being sneaky, stealthy, or doing anything like that. Like when you're fighting a freaking tank, you know, like I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to like duck behind here and then do this and then do it. Nope. You just got to like run out into the open and hurl grenades at them until they expire, you know? So like that was a kind of a dip off of the norm. But to be fair, the boss fights are not the norm. Normally it's the rest of the game. It's like, you know, 10% boss fights, 20% game, like 70% cutscene, right? So it's not the main thing that you're doing. You know?
Well, and so they actually, in a thematic way, slightly less in a mechanical way, but in a thematic way, they actually address this in the next game, in Metal Gear Solid 2 and on, where you can defeat every single boss in the game without taking their life. You can either stun them, or you can, you know, get them to trip and fall and knock themselves out, or whatever ridiculous gimmick it is. But this is the last game where taking a human life is required by the game. And in later games, they actually base all of like the new game plus rewards and stuff on like, could you go through killing like less than 10 people? What about less than 5 people? What about 0 people? Bosses included. And I don't think this was actually an accident. I think taking the violence out was like political commentary. I don't think it was a design choice so much, because the design choice of the bombastic, and I can tie this to visuals, of the bombastic boss fights is like you're sneaking around and everything's like kind of tight and claustrophobic. And then all of a sudden you're between a mountain range and there's a tank. Holy shit. And then it's like, okay, now you're sneaking around. And then, oh my God, that guy has telekinetic powers and he's throwing armchairs at me. Like there's a lot of these, all the boss fights are insane because they all have magic powers basically. And so you end up in set pieces. They're movie set pieces, right? So like they look different, they play different, they sound different, right? There's all of this stuff that's like dramatically different, but it's a game, so it impacts the gameplay, not just the way it looks or sounds.
Yeah, and fun side story, when I was battling Psycho Mantis, you know, Megan walked in and she was like, is he like flying? Is he like a ghost? Like what's going on there? I'm like, no, he's telepathic and telekinetic. And she said, oh, I didn't know there was magic in this universe. and I was like, well, you're not wrong. Like it's I was like, it's sciencey magic, but it's still magic. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like the bosses are effectively magic. Yeah. So one other thing that I just kind of wanted to, there's tons of stuff. I mean, this game is a very visual game, but just one other thing that I wanted to touch on was I felt that they did a good job, just like, and this is high praise, potentially undeserved praise, but in similar vein to like Mario, right? I noticed some areas where they definitely reused some animations and textures that I thought was like obviously to save space, but very welcome, because like, for example, smoke in the like, I guess a better way to say it would be like, smoke whatever, right? It's smoke, condensed air, anything that is like that, it's all the same texture and effect, right? It's just how much of it is there. So like one of the things I noticed at the beginning was like when Snake is walking around outside, you see his breath, and I'm like, that's amazing, because I remember when Skyrim did that and I lost my collective like, but now in this game, like here it is, like what, 20 years earlier, 10 years earlier? I don't know when did Skyrim come out.
Closer to 20.
Yeah. So all of these years later, right? Like, or all these years before, they were already doing it. And I was like, that's really impressive. But then when Snake gets electrocuted to
not
life,
death.
Near death, I don't know. I was pretty hard on hammering that circle. So I never even came close to death. I retained my strength.
Yes.
Sir.
No, dude, I survived the crap out of the torture. But you get the better New Game Plus item if you submit. So it's kind of like you get the moral victory if you win the torture, but you kind of get like the gaming victory if you submit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, so after like you're electrocuted and you're like, ugh, and like smoke billows off of you, I noticed, I'm like, that's the exact same smoke that we had from before. So I thought that, and then there were a couple of other places where they did similar things, but where I was like, that's clever and smart, where they are like, okay, well, we can't have a million different animations, but we want all of these different animations, so where can we save space, conserve? And I thought that was clever.
Yeah. I want to, because the first thing out of my mouth was crapping on the doll's eyes, but actually I'm with you that I'm surprised how well I think these graphics held up overall. Like, there were things that I was like, yeah, the fact that their mouths don't move and they just kind of like bobble their heads, like it's dated, but it still looks fine. Like you still know exactly what's going on. Like it's very, very seldom that you're like, what is that? What is that supposed to be? And because of the way they chose to do the hyper cinematic camera and you have first person view as an option, like if you need to look at something, up close, you can do that. So if you're like, what is this? Like, how do I get under there? Can I crawl over that? Like you can break out of the cinematic view and use the first person. So that's their concession basically. And the later games do the same thing. Even the ones that have a free roaming, like modern style 360 camera, there are still times where you're like, yeah, but the camera's 20 feet in the air. I need to see this thing that's like a foot and a half away from me. Okay, I'll like go into the first person view. So I like the graphics a lot overall. I can't believe I didn't remember this when we were actually talking about it, but this will be my last comment on visuals is, and I don't think this happens in the part of the game that you played up through. So later in the game, there are a handful of times during cutscenes where the footage that's playing on the screen is actual footage, like real nuclear.
Yes.
Yeah. So like the real nuclear missile tests and like real, you see there's some animals, there's like shots of animals that are for story reasons, but that to me is the equivalent of going from hoof hands cloud to pointy nose cloud, right? Going from a game that looks good and everything is fine to like actual footage of actual human beings. I'm kind of like, ugh. Oh, right. There's movies like spliced into this game that's basically playing a movie. Like I wish he hadn't done that. And he does that in all of his games. Like once he got that ability, he just decided it was great. And like, he just basically, he doesn't do it a ton, but it's just every time I'm just like, why? Like, especially in the later games where the Fox engine is gorgeous. It's like, just render it in the game engine you spent millions of dollars to build.
Yep, and instead they decided to fight zombies with it, right?
Zombies. Anyway, audio.
Yeah, audio. This game had audio. One of the things that obviously, just top of the hour we have to talk about with audio is the iconic whing, like that. I don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Just what?
The alert noise.
Definitely had the the alert noise. The alert noise was very good, very clean. Made me immediately aware that things had gone wrong. It then immediately changed the music to the same music. It is always the same music when you are spotted, which is again really consistent. It's consistent thematically, like in the sense that like the music tone and tempo is consistent with what is going on. It's not like some rock ballad or something like that, It's not playing screaming "We are the champions" while you're running around desperately trying to find cover. That'd be weird. So basically, when it is the most important that you be on high alert and be aware that everything that you have now landed yourself cleanly on the failure spectrum, that not only is there the visual of your SOCOM being generated, whatever the Soliton radar.
Radar. SOCOM's the gun.
But not only is your Soliton radar jammed, so the audio and visuals, but particularly the audio, really come together when you're spotted and on the failure spectrum, and I thought that was great.
It's probably frustrating for a lot of people that you lose the radar when you're on alert, because you would like to know where enemies are coming from so that they don't murder you. But I think it adds to the tenseness of the situation, where it's like, I kind of like to imagine it as like, maybe I could see the radar. Now's not the time to be checking it.
Right. Yeah. You're not looking.
Yeah.
Because you're running away from a problem.
Which, I mean, it says alert in giant letters and it's flashing red. So it's like that kind of fits thematically, because there's a different visual for when the radar is jammed. Right. And so the fact that they bothered to make it look visually different, but then it's like, there's the tense music. I don't know how many times you like crawled into a vent or something to hide, but when it goes into the first person mode while you're hiding, if you listen carefully, you can hear Snake's heart racing. Right. So they really play up like, this is like, you're gonna die. Like, if they catch you, they're going to kill you. You're trying to sneak into their base, right? So there's a lot of audio to take what is already visually stressful, but not really as dramatic. Because like the gunfire in this game is not super dramatic. I think most of the tension really comes from the sound and the music, like super tense music, the heart pounding, they're like the guards get onto the radio and they're like, there it is. And like, they come chasing you down and like, you can hear them running if they run on a surface that generates noise, just like when you run on a surface that generates noise, it makes noise. Like there's almost more scariness and tension and stuff coming from the audio than there is from the visuals, which I never really thought about it that way, but that's surprising to me. Like, you don't feel like, oh God, there's guys everywhere, they're bearing down on me. You feel like the world is closing in on you, and that's more of a trick of good audio than it is a trick of visuals, typically, or at least certainly in this game.
Yes, agreed. And I think that, the fact that, there's like I think, because I may be remembering this wrong, but there's like a small, like almost like alarm noise kind of going off, like while all the music is playing, and like,
yeah, it's a super generic, like,
yeah,
but it's an alarm.
So
I mean,
all of that, all of that stresses you out to the point where like, and the fact that you're not thinking strategically anymore. You were definitely thinking tactically. You were thinking like moment to moment, right? Like, what's the best thing I can do? And like, literally, like, I was running around panicking. As guy found me, so I was like, run, and then I like turned the corner and there's another guy. He's like, there he is. I just clothesline that guy. It's like, I keep running, and then I like jump back into the water and then walked around at the bottom of it because of course, you're walking and whatever. But like, so all of that like was an amazing, interesting, and improvisational experience that, if they didn't like suddenly put you personally in this heightened state, I don't think that you would have gotten that. So
yeah. And I feel like that this is something Hideo Kojima does really well, and I think his camera work is interesting. It's not always good, but I think it's always interesting. I do think the audio and the sound design and the musical cues, I think those are always good. I cannot think of a single place in the game where I'm like, oh, that sounded weird, or that this music is dumb. It doesn't fit right. Like, you may not like it, but it's quality and its appropriateness is pretty indisputable, right? There's a lot of use of like chorus and choir, right, to create this kind of sense of loneliness and to create this sense of tension. They use, you know, like the guys talking on the radio and like shouting, because you don't hear a lot of talking outside of cutscenes and outside of the codec. Like guards aren't just like chatting it up, and you don't just hear like people in the break room like hanging out, right? So when you hear, you know, there he is, and you're in full control, like that creates that huge sense of tension, because it's different than what's normally happening, which is the world is like mostly quiet. All the music is like fairly kind of quiet. Like there is a melody, but it's like a lot of low quiet singing, right? So you can hear the sound effects, right? Hey, it's a game with footstep noises where that actually matters and is like relevant to the experience. But there's just good music throughout. And right before the Psycho Mantis fight, because Hideo Kojima needs to make sure this far into the game you have been appreciating the good music he has in the game. When you come out of the women's room with Meryl, and for anyone who hasn't played the game, that is literally what happens. You exit the women's room, the women's bathroom, and you decide you're going to go kill a telepath. And so you actually don't know he's in there at the time. But then, so you come out of the bathroom and Meryl's like, "What's wrong, Snake?" And he goes, "What happened to the music?" And then as a player, you're just like, huh. And then like you kind of slowly and uncomfortably like proceed down the hallway, because all the other sound effects are still there. So you're on a marble floor. It's making noise from you walking and from Meryl jogging ahead of you. But you're like, what did happen to the music?
Where is the music?
Yeah. And then when you get into the Psycho Mantis fight, this is another place where they use sound and visuals in a way that totally breaks the fourth wall to screw with you. So during that fight, if you enter first person mode, you see through Psycho Mantis's eyes and it helps you pinpoint him in the room, because he can turn invisible, because of course he can. And I don't think he uses stealth camouflage. I think he can actually just make himself invisible, but he like floats.
Can't hide his body heat though.
That's right. So you have multiple ways to solve that problem, right? Which we'll get to in mechanics, multiple ways to address problems. But like you can use the thermal goggles, you can use the first person camera, you can just spin around in a circle when you have unlimited ammo and just fire in all directions constantly. But when you go into the first person view, it's all green because he's wearing a mask. But more importantly, he's wearing a gas mask, and you can hear this ragged, like nervous, like tense breathing because he's in a fight. But it's also ragged in a way that makes him sound like really unhealthy. And like you in this, you know, half a second or second or two of audio that you get when you pop into the first person camera, you hear it in a much louder way, because when he talks and it makes the, you know, like while he's talking, it's just like, oh, well, yeah, he's wearing a gas mask. But when you go into the first person view, it's super loud because you're hearing it in his head, right? Like the way he would hear it. And it's just little attention to detail like that throughout the entire game, right? Little sound touches that are just so well thought out, right? Different surfaces make different noises because some of them are loud enough to be heard, some aren't, right? Like you could just go on and on and on. They obviously spent ages and ages on every little sound effect that everything would make, whether it directly impacts the gameplay or it just impacts your kind of experience as the player.
And to be entirely honest, as usual, my notes for audio are pretty light. I do have a tremendous number of notes for gameplay and story and all that good stuff. So I don't know what else you have for audio, but I want to get to the meat of my notes, which is gameplay.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up by saying that I have a website like most people, but I tend to actually post things there. And I literally, after I played this game again, because I played it twice for this playthrough, because I was like, oh, I want to play through it with all the cool like New Game Plus stuff you get, just so I can like run around and be Rambo, but also be invisible and screw with people. It's super fun. Totally changes everything. But I played this game a lot with headphones on because I knew the music was very like quiet and subtle. And I was like, no, I like this music. I want to be able to hear it, but I don't want to bother my kids while I'm gaming. So I played this game with headphones on, and I literally in my to-do list have an item that says, write blog post recommending people play their video games with headphones on, because not every game has as much love for the sound design. Not every game has as much need, right? If it's not a stealth game, you might not need the sound in the same kind of way. I think we've talked about plenty of games where we're like, yeah, you could basically play this game on mute. Who gives a crap? But for anything made from the N64 PS1 era up through the modern day, I think it's probably worth trying to play that game either in a giant, Dolby 7.1 surround sound studio, if that's what your house is like, or just buy a pair of like mediocre headphones and wear them when you play video games, because, oh my God, like there is an entire layer of experience that I think most people are missing, even if they have troglodyte ideas like you do. If you played this game,
hey, I'm allowed to say that. That's my word. You've got no right using it.
That's fair. I'm sorry. I'm still learning.
You are sorry. No, it's fine.
But even for someone who doesn't tend to be consciously aware of those things, you would definitely be experiencing them, right? If you had headphones on when you played this, every time the sound of your footsteps changed, you would subconsciously be aware of it. When the music was building to a crescendo or was, ducking down because the characters are like about to have a soft whispery conversation, like you would be aware of all of that, even if you couldn't then explain to someone else like, oh, did you hear that? The music just ducked down because the characters are speaking a lot softer and they didn't want that loud music drowning out what they were saying, right? But you would feel it. And I really think I'm going to start going out of my way to play games from this era and forward with headphones on, because they had CD quality audio. So like, I want to hear it. I want to hear the sound design.
Yeah. Well, and also too, I think that one of the things, especially for me with good sound design, is that you don't necessarily notice its presence. You notice its absence, so like, yeah, I definitely have my troglodyte ears, but but I like like you said, like different surfaces making different sounds, right? You don't necessarily notice that it's doing that, but you would absolutely notice if everything made the walking on gravel sound.
Yes.
Because then the minute that you walked on metal and it sounded like you were walking on gravel, you'd be like, this sounds weird. And then the problem is, right when your ear hears something like that, your brain isn't focused where it needs to be focused anymore. It is trying to hunt down that issue, where it's like something's wrong. What's going on? Why does this feel weird? Why, and your brain's now like pulled out of the moment. So just like with, one of the things I noticed when I did, in a very, very poor fashion, some pixel art where it's like, if one pixel is out of place, it looks awful. I think that sound design is kind of the same way. And this game clearly had very, very well crafted sound design, because not only were there some things where I was like, oh, this is really well done. There was no point where I was just kind of like, oh man, I was taken completely out of this because of a poor sound design. The plot did that for me. So,
well, this will actually, here's my segue for you.
Okay.
You said you died a lot, right? So, like you do, this game's actually super generous with checkpoints. I also die a lot playing this.
It is.
But you heard the, snake, right, like a million times. But there's like 1,000 variations of that. Sometimes it's Mei Ling, sometimes it's Meryl, sometimes it's Campbell. And there's a few secret ones that you can only hear at certain parts of the game. So like when you're fighting Revolver Ocelot, if you suck and you keep accidentally killing the DARPA or the arms tech president, instead of snake, Revolver Ocelot says something like, "You idiot," and just like totally shuts you down. But you can only get that "you died" sound, because visually it's identical. You can only get that "you died" sound during that boss fight. And there's a few other places in the game where you can get that. So I like that they hid some of that, throughout. There's a bunch of codec conversations that are hidden throughout, right? Because the codec conversations there is a visual component to it, but it's mostly just two people talking. So it's mostly just the audio, and the the voice acting in this game is divisive. I actually think it's fine, but it is very hammy. It's like super hammy, right? And I can imagine playing a game where you were dying constantly and having to hear characters explain the same things over and over a million times. And it's like, yes, okay, regardless of how you feel about this voice acting, I don't want to hear it again.
Yep. Yeah. So let's see. So for gameplay, the first thing that when do you want to talk about the plot? You want?
I mean, all
all
there is the plot, right? It's like is that like all there is the medium when you're talking about art?
Yes. Well, more specifically, the issues with how well the plot has aged.
Oh yeah, not good. I mean, the political message of like nuclear weapons are bad and the government is two-faced. Like that, unfortunately, has actually held up startlingly well and doesn't seem to be like it's going to be going away anytime soon. But
well, I mean, that's like saying like the death and taxes are still going to be around. Like, you know,
yeah,
like that was a relatively safe bet. Not like I'm going to make a speculative currency investment in deep onion coins. Like. Yeah. I mean, and nothing about what I just said was made up. That is something that you could do.
Yep. But I mean, like a lot of Japanese artists of any kind, right? Painters, writers, poets, potters, right? And a lot of Japanese art is about nuclear weapons are bad for, I think, pretty damn obvious reasons, right? But like,
yep, and damn good reasons.
Yeah. But the Metal Gear Solid universe in general, actually, the whole Metal Gear universe, going all the way back to the original games, they spend a fair amount of time trying to remind you that like nuclear weapons are real. Like that's not science fiction and they're bad and you should like care about that. Right. And not, I don't think in a super ham-fisted way, but like that is a thread of continuity, I guess. Like it's a through line through this entire universe. Even when the plot isn't directly about it, they always kind of remind you like, yeah, the sci-fi super tank, the thing that makes it scary is that it has nuclear missiles. It's not that it's a sci-fi super tank. It's that it's a sci-fi super tank that has nuclear missiles, right? So that stuff I think is held up well. There's other parts though.
Yeah, there's definitely other parts though that super don't. The incredibly, I guess I know there's probably a word for it, but the He-Man, you know, like 80s era action hero.
Yeah, the Rambo Schwarzenegger.
Fantasy. Yeah, male power fantasy. That I didn't. And to be fair, like I remember very fondly movies like, you know, Predator, you know, or Terminator, or you know, even like Lethal Weapon, like stuff like that. You know, like I remember all those very fondly. I haven't gone back and watched Lethal Weapon for other Mel Gibson related reasons. But
Mel Gibson has not aged well. It's not that his movies haven't aged well. It's that he has not held up. And I don't mean he just got older.
Nope. Although the scenes where he gets tortured are more enjoyable, I guess now. But anyways, that's not the point. But you know, but I didn't realize how disjointed and how wrong that like hits me now. You know, because like there's just, you know, when it was like when he's like, oh yeah, I'm Solid Snake, and then, you know, I think the he hits on the doctor.
He hits on like, Mei Ling and Naomi in the same conversation, and
exactly,
and they can hear each other, like they can hear him talking to both of them.
Yeah, and so like to me, I was just kind of like, this is a work-related conversation. First of all, right? Secondly, it's in the middle of like, you know, a lot of stuff going on. They need to be relaying critical information, but there's taking time outside for him to hit on them, and they are super receptive towards that. Basically, he says like, yeah, when I get back, I'm going to have sex with both of you. And they're like, oh, if only we'd be so lucky. And I was like, oh God, all of this feels kind of gross.
Yeah, wait, so, and then, I want to be fair. To me, this is writing, not plot, because him being an awkward 14-year-old because he was essentially written as an awkward 14-year-old, that's not the plot isn't that he's a creep. That's just bad writing. The plot is like the nuclear walking death tank and clones and all that stuff, right? So like And I agree with you. Like, we should absolutely talk about the writing in this game, but to me, this is the writing, not the plot.
That's a very fair point. The plot, the overarching plot is
Bananas.
Is bananas, but interesting. Yeah, the writing is just exhausting. And I think that's a very fair point because I enjoyed the plot, and every time the writing got in the way of it, I got really irritated because I was like, can I have my nice ice cream sundae without you throwing anchovies into it every so often? Like it's frustrating. To me, it all kind of came to head with this one line. And please tell me I might have heard this wrong because I literally heard it once. I'm like, I'm not going back to hear this again. But like basically the Meryl, right? And first of all, she's freezered, like halfway through the whole thing. But again, putting that aside, right? When she says like, because she immediately starts hitting on him too, because of course, she does, right? But when she says like something, I smuggled something into the base. You know what I'm talking about?
Women have more hiding places than men.
Yes.
Yeah.
I heard that and I was like, why though? Like, why was that necessary? Like, it's just, that was so frustrating and consistently pulled me out of the narrative. And then the one other thing I have for writing, more specifically for this one, it wasn't plot, it was pacing. I thought that the pacing was a little odd in some places where like they had certain emotional beats that I felt were disjointed or too close together. For example, the Psycho Mantis's death scene I thought was really kind of interesting and fleshed him out as a character, where he's not just kind of like some like wild psychopath. And he actually reminded me a lot of Kilgrave from Jessica Jones,
Oh,
where like,
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Where like he was like kind of gifted with these psychic powers at a very young age. And that obviously warped him because if you immediately have contact with everybody's deepest, darkest thoughts at a young age, you're like, yeah, it's going to screw you up. Right. So I thought all that was interesting, and how like he like kind of like saw himself in Snake, which kind of like was like, ooh, warning sign. Like all of it was very complex, very interesting, very good death scene. And then right after that, Meryl effectively has a death scene. I know she doesn't die, but she does effectively have a Loki-esque death scene. They have they hit all the emotional beats, but she's not actually dead, right? Yeah. So I think that should just be called Loki-ing now, But anyway, so those two things happen within minutes of each other, right? And so that to me is, I was just kind of like, when I sat there, I was like, I don't really care. Like I felt tired when I was like watching Meryl's scene. I was like, why? It's like because it's that same emotional beat twice in a row, and that's not great pacing.
Yeah.
Like they needed more things to happen before they freezered Meryl.
Well, and I can make that scene even worse for you because she's like, Snake, I just want to do anything I can to help you because apparently that's my entire reason for existing. Well, If you survive the torture, Meryl is the one that is in the end game scene with you. And if you submit to the torture, they kill her, and Otacon is in the end game scene with you. If Meryl is with you, and you, like when you first wake her up, because she's like kind of unconscious, sort of, when you like wake her up, she says the thing that kept her going, how she would survive through, and I'm doing a direct quote here, torture and worse, which means she was raped, because there is no way that means anything else, right? The way she survived torture and worse is because she held on to the thought of seeing Solid Snake again. Someone she has only known for a few hours at this point. And here's the thing. So I don't remember if I've mentioned these on air or not yet, but there's this series of books from a publisher called Boss Fight, and like they wrote one about Shovel Knight. So like right after we played Shovel Knight, I read that book. And then they wrote one about Katamari Damacy. So like I was playing Katamari Damacy with Susan, so I read that book. And they have one about Metal Gear Solid. And so after I read the book, right? And the entire book is basically about how poorly this has aged. And to be fair, it's not like people didn't know this stuff was like hackneyed and sleazy in 1998. This isn't from 1948. It's from 1998, right? We knew this was not a good way to treat women characters in our stories. We knew this was not a good way to portray male characters in our stories. Like, people were aware enough of, that those sorts of things in 1998 that this is bad writing. It was bad writing then, and it has aged really, really, really poorly into the era of like Me Too and Donald Trump being president and all the other sexist horribleness that's happening. All of that being said, and I'm not trying to excuse any of it, but I do think there's a tiny bit of awareness that Hideo Kojima had, because in the later games, there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to tolerate the way Snake acts. And so that doesn't help this game be any less sexist and ridiculous and, freezer female characters and totally make them, one-dimensional stereotypes. That all happens. There's no way to undo that. But when he had a way to continue the story, he didn't continue it in that exact same way, which shows not just growth for literally the characters in his universe, but growth for him as a writer. Hopefully it means he surrounded himself with people who are like, yeah, don't make them say that. That's incredibly stupid. No human being would ever say that or should ever say that, right? Like, so there's some progression there, but unfortunately that doesn't do anything for the original game because that's all hindsight.
Right. I mean, like, it is quite possible, and hopefully that, like, Hideo Kojima just grew as a person, and, he was like, when he was young and, like, it was the 80s or 90s, and he was like, oh man, I'm going to create like this amazing, like, ode to the 80s and all this sort of stuff, and like did that. And then like later on, 5 years later, he's like, yeah, that's not the way to go. And like, while I still, think highly of a bunch of the stuff this game did, this is some stuff that I've decided to move away from because I've realized that this is not a good thing. So, like all of that, the fact that this does all of these things does not make the series irredeemable. It does not make the people that made them irredeemable. It does not do great things for this particular game.
Yeah. And
so
my personal feeling is that this thing we're talking about, the writing, more than the Saturday morning cartoon voice acting, more than the shooter controls that have not aged at all tolerably, right? More than some of the other decisions that were like fine at the time, but are now hard if you compare them to modern games. This is actually the thing that makes me pause when I would recommend this game to someone. Because I'm like, is this person going to be okay with all this, right? Because I if I'm being perfectly honest, having grown up with this game and this series, I didn't really think about it that much, right? Because I was a kid when I was exposed to this stuff. And so I didn't necessarily think it was like good or that I would want to emulate it, but it doesn't bother me in the same way, right? Like whenever you hear someone explain away their racist grandmother because they're like, oh, it was a different time. And it's like, no, it's just because it's your grandmother. Like you wouldn't tolerate this from anyone else. It's just because it's your grandmother, right? It's just because I played this when I was a kid that I'm like, no, it's fine. But then when I think about like, would I recommend this to somebody? And I know we'll get there, but like, this is the thing that gives me pause. Not any of the stuff that makes it a video game. It's the 80s-esque, male power fantasy stuff that I'm like, And people that I have recommended this to, men and women, old and young, high games literacy and low games literacy, I have consistently heard people say back like, wow, there's like a lot of childish sexism in the writing. Like, is this how this person thinks men and women interact? This is weird.
This is weird. It's like George Lucas with like, it's like, is this what he thinks love is?
Yeah. Yes. It's exactly like that. It's exactly like the way people talked about the love scenes in the prequels. It's like, no, this isn't, what is wrong with you?
So then this doesn't really tie us into gameplay very well, but this is one last thing about the writing, plot, and all sorts of stuff. But on a lighter note that will ease us if we can, is okay. So they're on like this base that makes the Metal Gear, right, and has the warheads and all this sort of stuff. And then the terrorists came in and took the base over. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
right?
It was already a military facility of a kind.
Right. But specifically like a military manufacturing facility.
Yes.
It looks
yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was it was the front was that it was a nuclear warhead disposal site, which is really what it was for. So there's Metal Gear is there, but then there's also all of the things they need to make Metal Gear threatening, right? It's like they started building a gun at an ammunition factory.
Right. They started fermenting tequila at an Alcohol Anonymous meeting.
That one's somehow worse.
All that being said, why then was there a torture facility already on the base?
Okay, so not only is that super weird, but when Snake uses that as the only identifiable landmark, he said, because he doesn't know where he is because he was knocked unconscious, and he's trying to get Otacon to come and help him, and he says, "There's a big torture machine nearby." And,
right?
and Otacon
Yeah,
totally casually is like, "Yeah, I know where that is."
Yes, that's what cued me into it, because I was just like, wait, that's right. So that existed. He's like, oh yeah, I know where the torture room is.
Yeah, that was there before the terrorists. And I mean, I guess because it was a military base, they had the facilities that a military would use to torture people without the oversight of the Geneva Convention.
But I mean, yeah, maybe. But I mean, even water, like waterboarding is like, that's torture, right? And that requires very, very few supplies in order to accomplish that feat. This was like a torture room. This was an honest to God, well-funded, well thought out, well engineered torture chamber. Yes. And so it's just and one that even somebody who didn't have a high enough clearance to know what they were building the freaking Metal Gear for, he was like, no, they're using it for nuclear weapons. Oh my stars and garters, why in the world would they ever do that? But the torture room, yeah, sure, that's down the hall and to the left, obviously. I guess I really probably should have puzzled out that they weren't being altruistic with this particular project. So, anyways, but yeah, so that's my other note for plot, which was they have a torture room. Like, why does that even exist?
Because everybody else is like military and paramilitary and like military adjacent. If they just didn't have Otacon, who's like a pseudo civilian, casually be like, "Oh, not the pool table. You mean the torture table that electrocutes people," which is just the most prominent feature in the over large torture room that we have for some reason.
Yes.
Like, that casual reference is what really breaks that moment. Like everybody else, right? The guerrilla terrorists and Snake, the super spy, like them talking about the torture rooms somehow seems pretty normal. But man, Otacon then just comes in and is like, "Hey guys, you talking about the torture room on the 3rd floor or the 4th floor? Because we actually have 2 now," right? Like that's what's super up about it.
Yeah, do you mean the torture floor or the nice torture floor? Because we've got more than one, and there's the good one and then there's a bad one, like it's not bad. I mean, they're both torture floors, obviously, but like one of them has a jacuzzi in the side so you can torture people whilst getting a nice little rub-a-dub-dub in the tub.
Let's get your jam on. So actually, that brings me to the most important thing I wanted to talk about, because I knew there was no way we weren't going to talk about the writing and the plot and stuff. So I was like, I'll leave that to George. I wanted to make sure we spent some time on Hideo Kojima's just total disregard for the fourth wall. Like, he doesn't just break it to be cheeky. There are funny parts where he breaks the fourth wall. There are, kind of gamey parts where like the characters with no wink or nod or nudge to the audience refer to like the action button, right? And like press the shoulder button to open your menu, right? Like that's just normal.
The start button.
Yes.
The start button.
Yeah, there's just totally normal dialogue that talks about the player. And then there's some parts that I think the way he breaks the fourth wall are like, because he was super excited about the technology, like the Rumble Pack and the PlayStation, but I appreciate them anyway, because they're just so Metal Gear Solid. They're so Hideo Kojima. Like, this is just part of this universe that it's sort of like a love it or hate it kind of thing. So when you survive...
They're on brand.
Say what?
They're
They're totally on brand. when you survive the torture, Naomi has injected you with nanomachines. And she tells you, because you've just like pressed the button a million times and your arm hurts, she tells you, I will activate the nanomachines to like massage your muscles. Place the controller against your bicep, and then it makes the controller vibrate. Like Psycho Mantis has you put the controller on the ground and he makes it vibrate. He tells you that there's save files from other Konami games on your memory card if you have like Castlevania or Pac-Man or like other Konami games on there. My favorite one though is actually not in this game, right? So in this game, you fight a sniper called Sniper Wolf. You actually fight her twice. That's when Meryl gets her pseudo death scene, right? In the third game, which is a prequel to this game, you also fight a sniper who is an old man. And his magical power is that he can lay in the jungle for so long that he has developed a kind of mild photosynthesis where that, like, that's how he can stay so still for so long.
Yeah, that's the thing that can happen.
So if you, and I swear to God, I am not making this up. If you get to that boss fight and start the boss fight and then save, close the game, go into the settings menu and advance the clock. I think it's 2 weeks. Like, so that now the date on the clock and the PlayStation 2 is 2 weeks in the future. And then you load your save file, you instantly win the boss fight because he has died of old age.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. So the fourth wall breaking, there's that, and there's one other thing I want to make absolutely sure that we hit on. So the fourth wall breaking, I really did spend some time thinking on this because I didn't like it. But that being said, I knew I couldn't come in and into this conversation with like, I didn't like it. Go to hell. So the reason why is because, and this will link into the other thing I want to talk about, but this game, one of the core aesthetics is clearly fantasy, right? You are the Solid Snake, right? You're the like all the stuff, all the things that go along with that, right? So to me, calling attention to you, the player, is antithetical to that core aesthetic, right? So if it's, if the core aesthetic is challenge or whatever, or any of the other ones, right? Then, saying like, oh, and you're also a player playing the game can be, it's not antithetical to that, but be like I am the Solid Snake. And they say like, no, you're actually just a kid playing a game like that. That's jarring, which can still work if one of the themes was your sanity. Right? If they had played more, no, like seriously, like if you the player, like like they did in I think it was Resident Evil, I forget which one, with the pyramid head, right?
That's
so, like he's like a representation. Silent Hill, right? Where you like he's like a representation of like your inner demons, like that kind of stuff. Where if they're dealing with like the themes of madness or anything like that, that would suddenly so for me to be like, yeah, I'm Solid Snake, and like, wait, no, is the game talking to me, George, or me, Solid Snake? What's going on? And to like play on that, then I feel like that it would be appropriate. But here is that I went from feeling like a like a solid, like a class A super soldier, right, into being back to being myself, which is none of those things.
A class B
and that was
super
very,
soldier.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, so maybe it was probably less jarring for you because you actually are a super soldier. But that being said, so that was jarring for me, and so it was kind of like somebody saying, like think fast, and then hitting me in the chest, right? And that's acceptable in a kung fu studio where you're trying to hone your reflexes and your overall situational awareness. It makes you a dick if you're doing it while you're during the Super Bowl party, right? or when did I do that to you? Right,
just punch me a bunch of times.
No, but I specifically remember at one point where I just came up, posted up for a high five, and so you posted up for a high five. I was like, betrayal 5, and I just like slammed you in the chest for no reason.
I mean, that, as you say, is on brand. So
yes, but that like so that being said, I can definitely see now that you've been playing Metal Gear for as long as you have, it is a consistent theme within the brand, so like you're used to it, and so now when it happens, it's kind of like, oh, hey, like it's this Monty Python thing that Monty Python always does,
Yeah,
but
and that's why I think
in this particular game, it kind of
that's why I think the difference is notable, because for you to say you don't like it, like that is fine, right? Because it's a taste, right? It's not objectively good or objectively bad. It is absolutely a taste. The reason I don't personally consider it immersion breaking is because once you know a little bit about the Metal Gear universe, you are showing up not for a stealth game, you're showing up for Metal Gear, right? It's like you don't go to Disney World because you're like, oh, like I like carnivals. It's like, no, you go to Disney World for Disney World. If you just like rides, you would go to a carnival or you would go to like a Six Flags or something. But like, whether or not a person likes Disney World, you don't go to Disney World just because it's part of a class of theme park. I don't think anyone should go to the Metal Gear Solid universe because it's part of a class of sneaking games. It is its own specific flavor and taste. And I feel like the total disregard for the fourth wall is an integral part of that, because there are actually times where none of the Metal Gear Solid games are trying to be scary, but there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of like fear of the unknown because all of the enemies seem to have magical superpowers, but you don't have magical superpowers. Wait, do they have magical superpowers, or is it nano machines? And like, so there is a lot of, I guess tension's the best word, but it's like just a step below like a terror of the unknown, right? Like a fear of the uncanny. It's like, and Snake is constantly like, what the hell is happening right now? Like you kind of identify with him because everybody else in the universe seems to think this is normal. And Snake is like, no, none of this is normal. Right. And in Metal Gear Solid 3, there's a way that they specifically play on your sanity as the player by breaking the fourth wall, because you have to trudge down this river, and the boss fight is like he's a ghost. There's no other way to say it. You fight a ghost, and
sure.
As you're trudging down the river, all of the spirits of the soldiers you have killed literally on this current playthrough pop up in the river and like mess with you. But because starting with Metal Gear Solid 2, you can play the entire game without taking a single life. When you get to that scene, if you haven't killed anybody, none of that happens. There are no ghosts. Right. It's not a scene that's written to make you feel a specific way. Like, oh, there's always going to be 20 ghosts and they always pop up at these specific times and they make these specific noises, or we randomized it in this way so that it makes them have this feeling. It is literally a mirror, right? It is a reflection of how you, the player, have been conducting the life of Snake in the game, right? And so most of the fourth wall breaking is not that. Most of it is tongue in cheek. Most of it is a little wink, nudge, nudge. Most of it is like just Hideo Kojima being like, I wanted to make movies. But there are times where it specifically creates an intentional connection between the actions of the player and the reality of the game universe. And so should he have done more of that or only that? I don't know. I like all the wink, wink, nudge, nudge stuff personally, but he was at least aware that is one of the options of how you can break the fourth wall, but still draw people in, right? It's like, oh, you're seeing the spirits of all the soldiers you've killed. No, not Snake, you, George, you, the soldiers you, George, have killed, right? So like that I think is pretty cool, right? And it's not done in a hammy way. Like you would have to play through the game multiple times and be like, oh, it felt like there were a lot more ghosts last time, or it didn't feel like there were this many ghosts last time, right? And then you would start to realize like, oh crap, it's literally the soldiers I've killed.
And like that, I'm more, like more prone to, like, for example, like in like Undertale, where, if you kill, spoilers for Undertale, but like if you kill the first person who you don't have to kill, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and you like reload your save, the flower will say like, no, that's not how this plays out. Like I know that you're trying to cheat. Like that to me is it's what it is it's what is it called? There's choice and consequences, right? So it's kind of like to me, it's kind of in that thing where it's fine to use consequences, right? When you don't, like, where you've forced the person to make choices that they don't fully understand the ramifications, but you've got to be doing it for like a very specific reason. And in some of these places, I felt that, like I said, like it just, for me personally, it felt like it was antithetical to the fantasy core aesthetic. That being said, is, like, that probably would have hit me with this game, being like, oh, this is a little antithetical. But, when it happened in Metal Gear Solid 2, I would have been like, yeah, okay, cool. And then like in Metal Gear Solid 3, I've been like, yeah, I'm used to it now. Like, this is a Metal Gear thing. And if it didn't happen in Metal Gear Solid 7 or whichever one they're on now, right? If it didn't happen in that one, I'd be frustrated by it because I'm like, what happened to all the tongue in cheek, stuff? Like, this is something I was on board with now.
Yeah. The first time, when you can tell someone's trying to be like, hey, this is what Disney World is, right? Like it or not,
Right.
just so you're clear, this is what it is, right? The first time you're like, oh, I haven't yet formed feelings about this. And then after some repeated exposures, you're like, oh, okay, now I either like it or I don't, but I understand the consistency of the universe. But could you imagine living in a universe? I mean, basically what I did to you was I told you how great Disney World was, but you had never seen or heard anything about it from anywhere else. You'd never seen any other marketing. No one else had ever really talked about it. And then I took you to Disney World and left you alone in there and was just like, figure out all the parts I didn't explain to you, enjoy, right? Like, that's essentially what bringing someone into the Metal Gear Solid world is like, it's very specific. It's not for everyone. A lot of choices are made that are questionable, even back then when it was new, let alone in hindsight, right? So to bring someone into that and just be like, hey, it's amazing.
You've got this.
Get in there, champ, right? Like I can, again, right? Hindsight's 2020. Like, I can totally see now, like, the next time I recommend this game to someone or choose not to recommend this game to someone, that's going to be based on different criteria than it was in the past. Because my criteria in the past was basically like, I like it.
The one other thing, and we don't have to really get into it, that I just wanted to touch on was many podcasts ago. Because occasionally we switch the format when there's not a whole lot of game to the game, where we're like, okay, we're going to go through the 7 core aesthetics, because if we do our usual visual audio gameplay, then we're going to be like, yep, and then episode over. So for one of them, when we were talking about the 7 core aesthetics, we were talking about the difference between fantasy and expression. And, so the knee jerk that I went to with fantasy was, like your typical RPG, that type of thing. And one of the things that you asked and I struggled to come up with an example of is when we got to expression, is you were like, well, how can you have, like, if you have a fantasy game, like an RPG, right, that's always going to have expression. And I was like, yes, RPGs have both, like they are both fantasy and expression as core aesthetics. And then you're like, well, can you give me an example of one that has one but not the other? And I was like, no, I can't. This is the example of it, right? Because the game, it's a lot of cutscenes. It very much so forces you to play in a certain way, and to the point where, like, you are not just disincentivized from running and gunning. It is damn near, if not entirely, impossible. So this is a game where it is fantasy. You are supposed to be Solid Snake, but there is no expression. Like you are made to play the game a certain way. You are playing it as Solid Snake. So I thought that was just kind of like, when I made that realization, I was like, Eureka, this is now my example of why those are different aesthetics as opposed to the same thing, which, yay, I'm happy that I now have a great example of it.
Well, and I think to your cleverness, because I think you're right. There are a few times in the game, and I won't go into deep details, but there's a few times in the game where they actually do allow you to solve a problem, like in this case, I mean a boss fight, right? Because there's lots of problems you can solve in multiple ways, but the boss fights, they kind of want you to solve them a specific way, right? Revolver Ocelot, you basically run back and forth in half circles until you've shot him enough times. Vulcan Raven, you have to throw the grenades into the tank. I've played this game dozens of times. I literally don't think there's any other way to do that. Psycho Mantis, you are supposed to switch the controller into the second port, which no one tells you. But they're like, you can use the thermal goggles. If you have the bandana, you can just spin in circles, firing insanely, right? The ninja, you basically have to fist fight him. You can shoot him to death, but it's so hard that it's not even worth it, right? Like, but When you get to the second Sniper Wolf fight, and when you get to the actual Vulcan Raven fight, where he's on his legs or walking around on his feet, I just forgot how to speak English for a second there. He's on his legs, as opposed to his tank. You can beat Sniper Wolf in a sniper fight, or you can just barrage her with missiles until she dies. And which is not like, they don't act in universe that's what you did. In universe, they act like you won a sniper duel, right? And when you fight Vulcan Raven, you can use a variety of explosives to kill him, but you can't really beat him in a gunfight. But you can be very clever with the way you use explosives to kill him, right? You actually have multiple options. But the game doesn't really recognize if you did one thing or the other thing. It's just that you beat him, right? So even these very few times where they're like, here's a large problem that you must overcome, and you have a few different options for how you're going to overcome it, but we're not going to recognize that you did it. We're like, when you beat Sniper Wolf, she says like, I am lung shot. And it's like, no, I hit you with like 9 rockets. You are rocket shot. You should be a cloud of mist right now. I shouldn't be having this super sad, dramatic death scene with you. Like, this shouldn't even be happening. There should be a crater where you were standing, right? But they can't do that because they have to tell the story that they're going to tell, like it or not. So not only do I think this is a good example of fantasy, not expression, but they actually dig in on the couple of times they let you express yourself as a player that it does not impact the fantasy at all.
Yeah, where they're like, nope. But all that being said, man, did it hold up?
Oh no, you wait. There's 2 things I need to at least address. Okay. One of them is the codec in this game is super important. They do not make it clear to you as a player how important it is, because there's tons and tons and tons of secrets and dialogue and additional story and world building that is hidden in codec conversations, a lot of which you can only access during specific action sequences, during specific sneaking sequences, after waiting a certain amount of time, when you have a certain amount of items in your inventory, when you're holding a certain gun, you get certain, like, tons and tons of world building and hints about what to do next, all hidden in the codec. They should be beating you back and forth across the face with how much you, the player, should be initiating codec conversations. And they don't do that, and I think that's a mistake. Another mistake is that, and we've talked about this mostly with like NES era games, is this game has a VR training option that literally walks you through, like, here's how you crawl like through a vent. Here's how you sneak up on a guy. If you walk on a surface that looks like this, it's going to make footstep noises. Here's how the vision cone works, right? They literally walk you through all that stuff in these VR training missions, which should really be how the game opens. That should be the tutorial sequences, like, Snake, we've pulled you out of retirement and we're going to have you go through these VR training sequences. Of course, they'll be, child's play to you, super soldier, but, you have to go through them to sync up the nanomachines that Dr. Naomi, there's a million reasons they could put you into this stupid scenario, right? But They don't do it. And it pisses me off because the game spoon feeds you so much, but the things that they, for whatever reason, do not choose to spoon feed you can really harsh the experience. And if you're willing to experiment and die and try things, they are really die. Snake. They're really generous with checkpoints. So the penalty for failure is actually quite low, which is great, but they could have still given you a little bit more of tutorial about how to play the game and had these checkpoints in there. And I know that the VR mechanic was well received as like this stupid little side mode that only has these 10 little sequences in it, because they actually made an entire spin-off game that is just the VR mode, and it's all these like random arbitrary puzzles, which is fun. How would you get from this side of the room to that side of the room if you only had a pack of cigarettes and a ration? How would you get from this side of the room to that side of the room if you had a Nikita missile launcher, right? Like, how would you get over here without killing anyone? How would you get over here if you had to kill everyone, right? Like, they put you, one of the scenes you fight a guard who's the size of Godzilla, like he's giant, just for fun, because you can do dumb crap like that, right? Like, they should have baked that into the main game, not made it a side thing that you could easily ignore and then an entirely separate game. Like, that that feels like a hardcore swing and a miss because they recognized some players were going to want to know how to play the game. And then they didn't bother to put it in the happy path. You could easily get all the way to the end of this game and not even know the VR training missions are there. Like, I remember...
I didn't know the VR training missions were there.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying is like, it's just another menu option that you would totally just pass over, especially in a game like this where I don't feel as incentivized to dive into the menu options in story-driven games, right? Because I assume that the world is designed to help feed me the story. And if it's not, that's a shortcoming, right? So I wanted to make sure I ragged on that a little bit because the fact that they don't shove the VR missions and really push on you how important the codec conversations are feels like they built this super rich world and there's already so much damn story, but they wrote even more books and side stuff. And they're like, if you get to it, it's fine. It's like, no, you put work into this, like help me experience it. and so now I will ask you in my best Clark Campbell impression, which I promise you is going to be, or Clark Campbell, is that his name? The guy who does Liquid's voice. I will now ask you, George, did you like my nostalgia goggles? Cam Clark, that's his name. Cam Clark.
Ah, excellent. So do I think it's help? I thought about this a lot. I'm going to give this a nostalgia monocle. And here's why. Did it hold up? There's a lot about this game that did hold up. There's a lot about this game that I found frustrating and infuriating. The aiming mechanics, which we didn't even touch on, but the shooting was damn near intolerable. The controls
we
were
said the game does not want you to get into shootouts, and that is one of the ways they disincentivize you. Is the shooting mechanics suck.
Yeah, the shooting mechanics suck, but then they force you to use them against Revolver Ocelot. I could have gone my whole life without running around chasing that jerk around that DARPA chief. Literally, one time I ran into the room and just blew us both up out of frustration, out of just sheer pettiness. But then that being said, is the visuals are beautiful. The kind of the way it approaches a lot of those, all the positive stuff we said towards the beginning, like all of that is also true. The thing to me that honestly puts out the edge is that this game is so heavily focused on the plot, right? And the bad writing just really twists the plot for me, right? So that to me was like the thing where I was like on the edge. I was like, this may be no nostalgia goggles needed, and I was like, nostalgia monocle, back and forth. But then like I thought about it, it's like, would I recommend this to somebody to be like, hey, this game has some fallbacks, but here you go? The answer is no, just because I would be honestly, I would be afraid if I recommend this to somebody, they came back to me and be like, do you think that this is an appropriate way to people to behave around one another? And it's like, well, no, I mean, like that's not, that's not part of it, so to me, that's the thing that kind of puts me over the edge. If you're okay with that or can tolerate it or are aware of it, and you yourself played Metal Gear Solid, and you were like, I might go back and pick it back up. Do I need to really have played the hell of it as a kid? No, it's overall it's enjoyable, but yeah, you got to watch out for that writing.
Well, this is a rare instance of us not only agreeing, because I'm with you, nostalgia monocle required because of the writing, right? So not only do we have the same rating, but for the same reason. The one additional...
That's rare? I feel like that's not rare.
Same rating for the exact same reason?
For the exact same reason, maybe. I don't know. Like, I think we pretty consistently are on the same page with the rating.
Yeah, no, I'm rating and reason for the rating. The one thing I would add to your list of like reasons I would tell someone to go back and play this is, I would say, if you really want to play Metal Gear Solid 5, which is an amazing game, it's current gen, it's just amazingly fun. It's so good, and it's more insanity, right? It's more bananas story in this universe, more fourth wall shenanigans, more hammy, ridiculous Metal Gear Solid nonsense. I would actually tell someone, like, if you really want to play Metal Gear Solid 5, you can start there, and you could play just that one. But if you are willing to put in the 40 hours, go back, play the first one, then the second one, then the third one, then the fourth one, then play Metal Gear Solid 5, right? So like someone who was like, oh, I've heard about the universe, I would say like, okay, you have to start at the beginning, not because the story is completely impregnable if you don't start at the beginning, because the story is completely impregnable if you start at the beginning, right? It's insane. When the fourth game came out, they literally released ahead of time a downloadable like dictionary of like, here's this character who is actually this character in disguise, who is a clone of this other character, but then they betrayed this person, and then you found out that actually none of that happened and it was a dream. Like, I'm serious. Like, just pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of like trying to remind you of what happened in the first three games to get you to the fourth game. And then the fifth game certainly doesn't tie up any loose ends. It's more bonkers insanity and adds in all kinds of new stuff, right? So you really should commit either fully or only play Metal Gear Solid 5. Like, if you think Metal Gear Solid 5 looks fun and you're willing to accept that there's going to be a ton of references that will make no damn sense to you, like, that's totally fine. The game is so good that it's worth just jumping into. But if you want to have a feeling for what's going on in this universe, you really got to start from the beginning. And to me, that's the best reason to tolerate the horrible writing and the dated stereotypes and all of the other negative things that go along with the translation of the already terrible writing, right? Like, nobody likes the first season of Star Trek Next Generation. But if you've never seen Star Trek Next Generation before, you should really watch the first season, because otherwise the following 6 seasons will make no sense. Like, they'll make way less sense.
Or yeah, way less sense. I mean, yeah, I can definitely, get on board with if you're going to do the whole series, you should check this one out. But I think my audio's cutting out. Lions.
The curtain falls. The music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black, and you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone, there's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creep in with the edge of a smile.